Welcome to the fifth Industrial Revolution. My name is Richin Kansal. I'm a professor at the Seton Hall University Stillman School of Business, and I am also the project director of this project, the fifth Industrial Revolution. It is a graduate level course and an exploration and narrative on the intersection of human existence, human race, and space. We see two trend lines right now. Number one, the conditions on planet Earth keep changing and evolving on a daily basis. In fact, earlier this week, there was an alarm sounded. The alarm sounded said the temperature of planet Earth would rise by 1.5 degrees within the next 100 years, which will make large swaths of the planet uninhabitable. And the alarm says, if we don't do something now, it might already be too late, but maybe we can bend the curve a little bit. So that's one future, a future where Earth becomes uninhabitable, or at least a lot more adverse than it is today. On the other hand, the race for space is there. Musk launched a Tesla a few years ago. Branson and Bezos launched themselves a few weeks ago. Yesterday in the news, we talked about a meteor potentially hitting the Earth within the next 300 years. And we talked about how we can actually now launch spaceships to alter its course, something that was science fiction, but in the realm of technology today. Wall Street is calling it the next $1 trillion industry, and the race is on, right? So that's another trend line, and it will continue to progress. Now, where do these two trend lines intersect? Life on Earth and life in space, we don't know yet. But if we think of barriers, one of the biggest barriers is human body. Human body is built to survive on planet Earth as we know it today or knew it a few million years ago. Neither changing temperature on Earth nor the extraterrestrial environment of other planets right now seems feasible to support human life. So what will enable that? Is it health technology? And will that unleash the new socioeconomic structure of our society and future, the next industrial revolution? So those are the questions that we are grappling with. And today it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Mahesh Daas. Dr. Daas is the 8th president of Boston Architectural College. He's also a mentor, my thesis advisor from 20 years ago. We are not aging ourselves, a great friend, and a very, very well-known thought leader, not only in the broad field of architecture, but also robotics and technology in architecture. Joining me as well are two of my students, Anthony and Tillman, who are supporting me on this project. And with that, Dr. Daas, welcome. And why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and your work?
Yeah, well, thank you, Richin and Anthony and Tillman. It's great to join you all and the community of students, faculty, staff, and your partners, perhaps alumni who are watching this video cast. Well, I am a Renaissance person. As Richin has just introduced, my interests are broad, but my approach to this broad set of interests is from the lens, through the lens of design, and how design is where the technological progress and the kinds of trend lines that Richin, you've just pointed out, all of them come to meet how we shape the human habitation and life in general, how we support that. And that is where design comes into play. So that is something I just wanted to mention that. And I always think about my interests ranging from, existentialism and to magic realism in literature, in particularly Latin American and French literary traditions, to robotics and artificial intelligence, and anything in between.
Yes.
So I think I like that breadth of it, but I also like the focus of design to look at these various elements.
Wonderful. And you talked about existentialism as one of your areas of interest. So let's start there. What is the future of human existence?
Yeah, so which is a question that I think we all ponder, and we have pondered perhaps throughout human civilizations and maybe well before that too.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since we are actually biologically able to ponder.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So we are the only human species left on the earth today as Homo sapiens. And what is the future of this particular species, us, is a good question. We need to ask ourselves. And if we don't ask ourselves, we are not being responsible enough.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do that, we have a couple of ways to look at it. One is we could look at it from a dystopian perspective, where we can imagine the worst possible outcomes. And that is that the human race becomes extinct and life actually on Earth becomes extinct, and perhaps in the entire known universe, and the only planet where life thrives. So that is one particular direction of thinking. The other direction of thinking is that, gosh, we have some level of intelligence that we are bestowed with as species and as a planet. We can actually alter the course of the futures. And maybe there is some agency we can exercise in doing so. If so, what are those choices we can make? How best can we make those? All the while keeping in mind that dystopian possibility. Right. Because it is certainly a strong possibility.
Right, right. So that's good. What you are saying is use our collective intelligence to foresee the dystopian possibilities and design to avoid it, right?
Yes, and there is one more thing I would introduce there, and that is Gregory Bateson, who was, of course, the celebrated anthropologist. He wrote now nearly 50 years ago or more, actually, in fact, more than 50 years ago, that there is one particular aspect of being human that is utterly essential for ensuring existence, if not thriving, of life, and that is humility. It talks about humility not as a moral imperative, but rather as a systemic quality. And let me elaborate a little bit on that, because it's very important in our conversation that we have to have a certain humility to approach problems or prospects of planetary or interplanetary scale. And we have to always leave the scope that we don't know a lot. Although we do know a lot, we know enough to know that we do not know a lot more.
Right.
That we have to learn. And that the unknown unknowns are always going to pose certain set of risks. And if we are not humble enough, we would become blind to those possibilities.
Right.
So that is number one, is humility. And humility to also understand that we may fail in the process.
Yeah.
That we cannot ensure a 100% success, that all risks are going to be accounted for, and that we will thrive and live on forever. That might not be possible. Let's just be humble in that. Arrogance, systemic arrogance, is the first element that predicts failure. Whenever we see that arrogance, that we can solve these problems, or we understand these issues, there is nothing else to be known, we got it, that is a sure foray to failure.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Just this whole idea of, I mean, everywhere when you talk of risk management, you're always talking of the knowns and the unknowns, and then known, unknown. And frankly, the unknown in my view is the 95%. the known and known unknown is maybe 5%. So the humility part is very, very important. I absolutely would agree with that. And systemic arrogance is a good predictor of failure in the near term. With that, let's switch a little bit to design, right? And then you talked about that you look at everything from design perspective, and existentialism, we can look at it from a design perspective as well. And there's all this talk about design thinking and design thinking to solve human problems. So for our audience, can you just, very briefly explain what is design thinking and how we can apply design thinking to solve for the unknown unknowns, as well as the known unknowns and the known knowns?
Yeah, good question, Richard. And I will start with saying that human beings have been solving problems. In fact, life in general, any living being solves problems.
Mm-hmm.
That is how you begin to evolve. You begin to learn, you adapt, and you evolve.
Right.
And human beings have a particular ability to be able to see, define, or redefine problems and solve them in a collaborative way.
Mm-hmm.
Our collaborations can extend into thousands, tens of thousands, or even millions of people working together in unison.
Yep.
As a planet Earth, we are a few billions of people working together. And that ability, as you all know, Harari talked about in his writings elaborately, is uniquely human.
Yeah.
Right. So then what, if we have been doing this forever, what is design got to do with this?
Yeah.
Why is design and design thinking special? Are ways of solving or approaching problems?
Right.
And I think the answer is that design brings the element of creativity, in particularly methodical creativity, to redefining problems, to shifting perspectives, to change the way we look at things, and the ability to creatively solve problems that could not be thought otherwise. And design as a discipline has developed a body of knowledge, skills, methods, and techniques, and approaches, frameworks that are pretty unique and robust at this point of time.
Yeah.
Say that design is a vertical, but at the same time, design thinking is a horizontal, just as scientific thinking has become horizontal.
Right. Right. Multidisciplinary. Yeah.
Without even thinking twice about in scientific terms. Likewise, I hope that there is a future where we can think about design without really being designers as professionals necessarily.
Right. A lot more.
That is how I would approach design, that it's a very thoughtful way of solving problems through creativity applied to it, but particular types of creativity. First, let's say spatial creativity, or how you can shape things literally, right? Relationships.
The shapes, yeah. No, wonderful. So going on that track, I will just dig a little bit deeper and give you a challenge right now. You've just been asked to lead a team that has to design the next best-selling candy. Give us an example of applying design thinking to this challenge.
Absolutely, yeah. I would say I would first start with questioning the question. In other words, I'm not going to take designing the candy as the starting point.
Right.
But rather asking, why are you actually asking me to design a candy? What do you want to achieve by doing so? And is that the right solution to get to where you're trying to go?
Right.
So that's the first step. And this, I'm not the first one to do that. Way back, IDEO was approached by Amtrak and said, well, redesign a seat. And they said, well, thank you for the project, but why are you trying to redesign the seat?
Right.
And that led them to a comprehensive systems transformation at a systems level design. They said there are about 14 different steps that a particular passenger takes in engaging Amtrak. that right even before you ever buy a ticket,
Yeah.
to a couple of steps after you leave the train, that entire gamut is the experience
Yeah.
of travel,
Yeah.
engaging Amtrak. And you have to redesign that entire journey,
Yeah.
not just the seat, which is perhaps one step. And so my question would be, exactly what are we trying to achieve with designing or redesigning Candy? And then we can say, maybe it has a role in that entire gamut of experience design.
Yeah, no, that's very good, because a lot of times we just get so focused on solving the question or the problem that we have been given, because that's how we have been educated, that we forget to see the big picture. And when someone says design my house, we ask them how many rooms. We never ask them what kind of experience you want to have when you're living in this house. So and it goes back down to human existence, right? Why are we, what are we, and how we want to live our life and experience it, and design thinking and actually enable that, not just in architectural design but also in Candy design or Amtrak example that you provided. So thank you for that. Let me shift gears once again and then now talk about robotics. I know you are, if not the one, very few people in the field who talk about robotics and architecture. So talk to us about what do you mean by robotics and architecture, and then you also talk about the 4 robotics frameworks in your work. So tell us a little bit more about what those are.
Absolutely. The first, yes, as you said, robotics and architecture intersection is fairly new and emerging. And you are referring to my recently co-edited book, Towards the Robotic Architecture.
Yes.
And that continues to be the only comprehensive book on robotics and architecture. So the first, the robotics component, and then how robotics informs architecture. Because I think for a lot of people, architecture itself can be a topic that is daunting enough. About robotics and architecture, the first question is, what has this got to do with that?
Yeah.
So let me approach there, as start there and say the frameworks you are referring to, Richin, in my essay on robotics and architecture is, first of all, how can we think about the future, or a present and the future, where robots and robotics, and certainly artificial intelligence, which is underlying this whole enterprise of robotics, are going to shape our future, and how our environments begin to respond to, utilize, and be transformed by the technologies and the context that is being transformed by the technologies. So the first thing is context. Already robotics are in all walks of life. In everything we know or we do not know, we might not be connecting all the dots at the moment, but it is pervasive.
Yeah.
And in fact, I give a talk on this topic, and that's already available on the web, so you're welcome to check it out.
Sure.
There is a revolution, and certainly it goes to your framework of 5th Industrial Revolution, Richin. So certainly this has been called the 4th Industrial Revolution by many people.
Yeah.
And so we can say that, yeah, that's where we begin. And robots are going to be present in day-to-day activities, in the home. I already have robotic, brooms and mops and robotic toys that kids play with, and so on. And the car I drive is already a robot.
Yeah.
And we might not realize it, but cars are, automated to a great extent. And when you're driving a self-driving car, an autonomous vehicle is a robot, is completely a robot. And I use the word robot in the sense of 3 things. A robot is able to sense the world. A robot is able to think about that information and make decisions and goals, and able to change the world physically. So a robot is a physical thing. And it's a kinetic mechanism where you sense, think, and act in the world in a certain way. So anything that is able to do that is a robot.
Humans are robots too.
And humans are robots by the definition, because we are able to sense, think, and act. You're absolutely right. And it's not me who said it. Was a number of people have said that before, and that we are biological robots.
Yeah.
And we are making robots in our own image, the image of life. And so it's a reflection of life. It is a continuation of aspects of life. It is artificial life, surely, but it is nevertheless life. And so that is my understanding and definition or approach to robots. And if they are going to be present all through our environment, they are going to alter how we live. They're going to alter our relationships. They are going to change. For instance, let's just take autonomous vehicle. If autonomous vehicles become more a norm, not an exception.
Yeah.
Although we still have to see when that is going to happen and if that is going to happen. Let us say it is going to happen. Then the entire aspects of how the cars move about, the efficiency, effectiveness, the parking spaces, all of those are going to change, and how we summon the cars and how we just jump in and carry on our life inside those environments. All of that is going to change.
Right.
And that is an opportunity for designers to rethink architectural environments and the cities. So cities as a whole are going to. We are also talking about autonomous, vertical takeoff and landing vehicles using drone technologies or whatever other technologies. But those are being tried out already, prototypes. And that is going to change urban transportation. We are looking at delivery systems, such as your typical Amazon or some other delivery services.
Drone services, yeah.
Already trying either humanoid-based or wheel-based or other forms or drone-based delivery systems that might have it might transform urban transportation. So there are a lot of ways to think about it. But I think the most fundamental way it is going to impact us is at a human level. That means the interaction with the robots. So human-robot interaction, one of the frameworks in our book we talk about is the way humans and robots interact with each other, the way robots and robots interact with each other, then humans, robots, and the environment interact with each other, and the robots and the environment interact with each other. So 4 different ways interactions are going to be impacted. That is one way. The second way is even more mind-bending, and that is, we always think about robots as the other.
Right.
When we say robot, it is like, I am human, and that is robot.
Yeah.
But what if we are robots ourselves, as we just talked about, that we are biological robots? Whether we understand it or not, by that definition, we are biological robots, consisting of molecules which are working together very diligently to make this machine work.
Yeah.
And we are able to think and imagine other kinds of machines. And we are making robots that are mechanical, electronic, cybernetic.
Yeah.
So if we take that kind of framework, then it blurs the distinction between what it is to be human and what it is to be robots. And that is my plug-in for our next book, which is Being Human, Being Robot, that it blurs the boundaries. And when it does, it is going to change fundamentally how we think about ourselves and how we think about the robots. When we say robot, then we are not anymore going to be thinking about some mechanism that is going to obey us and that is going to be subservient to us and that is simply going to do what we ask it to do. That is so not current thinking.
Yeah, no, I mean, this idea of biological robot, I mean, if humans were to design a perfect robot, I would say they would like to design the next human, right? Who can sense, think, and act. We are talking about edge computing as the next technology. And what they're saying is if a robot has edge computing technology wrapped around it, then it doesn't have to send data to a central location. It can actually process data there and make decisions right there, which humans already do, right? We can process data where we are and we can make decisions and act. So yes, the whole idea of technology is we are trying to recreate ourselves in a machine form. And so, we are trying to reverse learn. And in medical technology, of course, now we have created robots that can travel through our body and sense what might explode and then fix it before that. So technology keeps advancing. So let's keep on that, right? We are building robots. And you talked about 4 types of human interactions: human robot, robot, human robot environment, and robot and environment. So let's go to space and then just keep going into that trajectory for now. So we are now into space. So is it a robot environment interaction, or is the human part of that?
Yeah, very good. And at the outset, Richin, you talked about one of the trend lines.
Yeah.
And that is space. Why are we seeing the kinds of, no pun intended, explosion of technologies related to space and space travel? And that is because the robotic technologies have come of age. For instance, now virtually all the space vehicles are robotic. That is why Tesla is able to land its rockets back on Earth and reuse them. That is robotic technology.
Yeah.
And you are able to send anything into space and completely fully automate things without any human intervention. So you are able to send things to the moon and the Mars. So those are not possible without the robotic technologies coming of age. So that is the first thing about it. Second thing is, it's been now understood and acknowledged that going to Mars is not possible without robotic technologies.
Yeah.
Even travel to, let alone settling on Mars, is not going to be possible without robotics. And we know that now. Mars is the only planet in the entire solar system, perhaps the entire universe, that is only inhabited by robots. And we're talking about mechanical robots, not biological robots yet. Biological robots will probably get there in the near future.
Oh yeah, hopefully near future. Yes, we are racing there. Yeah.
So that is one way to imagine this aspect of it. The second way to think about it is that the human capabilities, and you alluded to this at the outset too, the human beings are designed to and have learned and adapted to the terrestrial environment and its biome and everything included in that. And when we are leaving that environment, we are entering a pretty harsh and new challenging environments that are unforgiving, and we haven't adapted to, and we will not adapt to biologically for perhaps millions more years. Yeah. And that means that leaves us only one recourse, and that is technological recourse. In other words, we have to have some way of amplifying or augmenting our abilities and our ability to survive and thrive in environments not designed biologically for us. So that is where technology becomes essential, robotics become essential. And then robotics, not just as a mechanical enterprise that is outside, but is integrated into the human body in some shape and form. We already see prosthetics integrated. We see quadriplegic patients. For example, 2014 Soccer World Cup was kicked off by a quadriplegic human who was given a robotic superstructure, robotic exoskeleton to kick off the football. So that is one example, already a few years old. But prosthetic technologies as becoming part of the human body is already there. And even more so is what you've talked about, the brain and information interface. Brain-computer interface is already being worked on, and it will, go wherever it will go.
Yeah.
But all of those will enable the blurring of the boundary between biological and the mechanical, the biological and the cybernetic is in artificial intelligence technologies, and agencies becoming part of human agency.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it's not a matter of if, but it's only a matter of when, where human technology interaction becomes a lot more symbiotic, cybernetic, the term that you have been using. It's just a matter of when, and we are already seeing it in terms of artificial knees and artificial hips and cardiovascular stents and devices and defibrillators, et cetera, that are in the body, and like I was saying, miniature robotics. But what you're saying is that trend will continue, and it will actually maybe even change the course of our life as humans, and then actually create different different socioeconomic structures almost, if we start with that. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I think the issues of the human issues will become pretty predominant in our discourses. So issues of ethics, law, and norms that govern human societies are going to be challenged by these mind-bending transformations about the image of our identity of being human. When we think about human right now, without our own awareness, our own conscious and deliberate, intentional awareness that we are already talking about ourselves in terms of computers and information technologies. When we say such things as, I'm trying to process it, and I'm going to provide some feedback, all of these are terms that have been drawn from the information technology knowledge base. And we are going to be doing that with the robotics and artificial intelligence knowledge base going forward. So we're going to redefine what it is to be human. So we are not only shaping robots in human image or image of life in general, but we are going to be reshaped and transformed about what we think about ourselves. So identity is going to change. But one thing that is going to keep things interesting is, and to add an element into it, is the notion of consciousness that we have still not understood truly what it is to be conscious, although we are conscious and we are operating, and we have been operating forever with being conscious, sentient human beings and living beings, but we still haven't come to grips with it. However, that is not going to limit what it means to design sentient elements like robots.
Right.
Element is going to look like, walk like, and talk like it is intelligent. It is intelligent. So that is going to be an ethical issue in how the society is going to transform itself, how the laws will change to protect the other kinds of sentient elements in society, such as robots.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the big debate in the autonomous vehicles space, right? Say if they become the norm, how do you change the insurance laws? How do you, if an autonomous car hits a walking human being, who's liable? And yes, a lot of thinking to do, and ethics and law are really going to need to evolve. And in my mind, they are actually the barriers to adoption of technology, because technology is there. We haven't evolved our systems to adopt them in a way that makes sense to us as we live today, which is very fair. So, and then robots, right? I mean, certainly infinite possibilities, only limited by our own imagination. So let's take our imagination on architecture on planet Earth. At some point in time, do you see buildings becoming robots? I mean, I know you'll say buildings are already robots, but do you see buildings becoming robots that can self-build, self-maintain, self-heal, and create microenvironments where humans can survive if life outside of that building or environment outside of that building is not as good. So do you ever see in architecture, evolution of self-thinking, building, healing buildings?
Yeah, good question. And of course, the answer is yes, that is the future we are headed into. And it might be unimaginable at the moment because we are largely living in the environments that are not as intelligent as in informationally or intelligent in being able to make decisions and respond. However, there is a certain level of intelligence that is requisite with what needs to be done. In other words, the buildings are still dumb, largely dumb.
Yeah.
Meaning that they are not necessarily sensing, thinking, and acting in all the ways they could, but they don't need to at the moment. So where there is a need, there will be a response. To that end, you're absolutely right. If we are going into space, then those are robotic environments necessarily so, because you will need to constantly be functioning in a harsher, infinitely harsher environment, responding to factors that are beyond the human ability to sense, think, and respond. And the speed with which we can respond, or the ability with which we can respond, are going to be utterly limited. So therefore, we will be, if we are going beyond this planet, we will necessarily be living inside robots. But imagine this, if you think that is dystopian or far-fetched, what are autonomous vehicles? Autonomous vehicles are architectural environments in which we dwell. We are inside them, we are traveling and we are living, we are having a cup of coffee inside that vehicle, we are making notes, we are looking at our phones, whatever we do in autonomous vehicles already are robotic environments. It is just a microcosm of what is to come if we were to think about harsher environments.
Yeah.
But Richin, I think the point is more important, not because we might go live on Mars. When we talk about such things, people are offended.
You're right.
And say, well, just first fix the planet.
Earth, yeah.
Before you go to Mars.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And they have a valid point that why are we not talking about fixing the planet and its problems before we go to Mars, as if it is sequential? And my response is, there is something educational about it, going and traveling to places that you are not used to. How do I know that? Because, hey, Grishan, you and me in particular, we were born in India.
Yeah.
And we came to the United States, now decades ago. And when we did so, we realized that everything we imagined, thought, assumed before had to be questioned and challenged, forming a new worldview.
Yeah.
And it was transformational for me. And as it is for you and for many other travelers and immigrants in general. And in that sense, travel has value in and of itself. You go and see how people and cultures and civilizations are different in different areas in response to different climatic conditions. Already on Earth, there are different climatic conditions, and go to arid regions, desert regions, then people are living already in very harsh, hot, dry environment.
Yeah.
And Mars is a few steps further. Beyond. And in fact, doing that is essential to understand and realize the value of the planet we have and the life we have and the environment we have, and that we need to care about it and protect it. That shift in perspective is the most valuable thing about space travel. It's not because somehow we are going to have millions of people living on Mars and the moon and elsewhere are floating around in space in Elysiums. That's not the point. The point is, by undertaking such a journey, our view of Earth is going to be changing, and hopefully for the better, that we come to realize what we have is more valuable. We need to protect it and to transform it with care. and compassion. And that is the ultimate takeaway for me, at least, in pursuing such things as travel and settle on Mars. I would say, let's do it so we understand what we already have, the blessing on this planet.
Yeah, and I would take travel over war anytime, because we all know internet came out of DARPA. A lot of technologies, a lot of medicine came out of the necessity to create the best fighting machine to win wars. And I'd rather take travel as the next frontier, where we innovate and bring back technologies that make Earth better. I was also, when you made the comment that Mars is the only planet that we know that is fully inhabited only by mechanical robots. I mean, that's also something that I hadn't thought of before, but we are creating a pilot project there as to how robots can create different environments and what we can learn from them. So this has been very, very interesting so far. Anthony Tillman, what questions do you have at this point?
Yeah, so Dr. Daas, first and foremost, thank you for making an appearance on the show. I think I could speak for the whole team when I say that this was a really informative and intellectual discussion, but I'm going to challenge you a little bit if you don't mind. So, please. Yeah, no worries. So one thing that I was wondering too is if you could extrapolate any ideas presented in your first book, Leading with Aesthetics, to our thesis, right? Are there any translatable ideas or claims that you maybe made in there that you could extrapolate to what we're sort of building here?
Anthony, thank you. And thank you for pointing out my first book, Leading with Aesthetics, the Transformational Leadership of Charles M. West at MIT. So the book, which came out in 2015 and came out in paperback a couple of years ago, is about how MIT reinvented itself through architecture and design. And that it is the institution is what it is today because of the leadership that was informed by architecture and design as an agent of transformation, right? So that is one commonality between everything we're talking about is that design is an important agent of change and how we live and adapt and evolve, be it as human beings, individuals, or as institutions, or as societies, civilizations, and as a planet, right? So that's one way I would extrapolate that understanding. And when we talk about aesthetics, let me just talk about what it is, what it means operationally. How I define it is that aesthetic is our experiences that accentuate and wake up and enliven our senses. And it is the opposite of anesthetic. Anesthetic is that which numbs your senses. You don't feel anything. Whereas aesthetic, you feel things. Mm-hmm. In other words, it is through aesthetic that we actually come to experience ourselves. It's not something exotic. It is something we do every moment, right? So leading with aesthetics was really meant to be leading by understanding how we feel and experience as enlivened human beings and living beings. So that is the foundation for that approach into the book. And that just simply goes to everything we talked about, even space travel and all that. We got to lead with how we feel. Ultimately, that is what is going to motivate us to act about anything. Mm-hmm. And understanding those feelings and reflecting on that and connecting with each other and being empathetic. Those are the kinds of things important, not just for humans, but between humans and robots and between robots and robots as well. So there is a lot connected in there between leading with aesthetics towards robotic architecture, space travel, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you once again, Dr. Daas. Just to pair at that point, it's kind of interesting. So I have almost the opposite question of Anthony. So we spent some time earlier discussing design thinking, and I wanted to ask you, based on you've read our thesis, you've heard our discussions, what do you think that we could be doing better to approach this from a design thinking perspective?
Excellent question, Tillman. And that is the answer is why. First, let me question the question and say, why do we need design thinking at all? Right? If there are many different ways of solving problems, people go about doing that all the time. So why do we need design thinking? Is there anything special? Not only that, in the particularly in the business world or in the leadership studies, design thinking has been around a long time, ever since it has been popularized in the 90s and all the way till now. So it's been around as a popular topic for at least a couple of decades, if not longer, right? So let's start there and say, why is it still relevant? Why is it important as we move forward? So the answer is, design thinking is a way of looking at the world, understanding how we shape it, and make it livable in ways that are creative. That is very important to understand. That's the first thing. And that creativity is not the asset of just a few people. That creativity is fundamentally not just human, but anything living is creative, has the ability to be creative. You know, we see that in our pets, and we see that out in the wild, wilderness. Creativity is an essential quality and characteristic of evolution, right? So let's now connect that with design thinking. Design thinking is about harnessing this entire body of knowledge of design, you know, how designers think. There is a body of knowledge. So in other words, it is a certain field that is broadly out there, and designers use it all the time and think about the world in certain ways, designerly ways of knowing and thinking. And now that can be something that every human being can do. And that is where design literacy comes into play, as I talk about design literacy and design thinking as an important competency for all people and all societies, so that we are being thoughtful but also creative by challenging certain questions, framing and reframing problems, so that solutions we are not able to contemplate within a given question can be pondered and explored and realized. Just as I talked about in the case of the candy, or in the case of the seat with Amtrak, in all of those cases, we'll have to examine and interrogate question itself and the problem itself, reframe it for a deeper understanding, and then thoughtfully and creatively shape solutions that are more meaningful. Then we will adapt and evolve.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So let me oversimplify design thinking, Mahesh, and then tell me if I'm totally wrong here. Are you saying design thinking is thinking about the experience that someone will have when they hold that object or thing, or walk through it or live in it? Are we really talking the surrounding experience?
Very good question. All the above, Richard. As we can design experiences, we can design objects, we can design environments and interactions, right? And anything in between. And that covers the gamut of what we do as human beings. So we are only bringing certain sophistication brought about by the evolution of the body of knowledge in the fields of design.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely. So creative approaches to solving problems developed through the study of the discipline of design.
Yeah, and that
I just came up with one. Yeah, wonderful.
That's made accessible to everybody now. That's the hope.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, we make it sound, very ethereal and very complex, and but the way you have just described it hopefully brings a lot of clarity to exactly what we are saying and what we are trying to do in a rational way so that we don't not use the word on vodcast, but to not call it what it is, and then come up with our own interpretations.
Yeah, and if I could add one more thing, Rich, in there to that is, even though design thinking has been around as a broadly accessible set of frameworks and approaches to, in the business world, certainly, written about, and we can think, oh gosh, that is just a trend and it has died down or waned. We have to understand that it is still endemic to only certain circles, certain certain professional bodies of knowledge and or managerial areas of practice. But it is not certainly widespread in the society. And I think making design thinking accessible as a competency for all human beings is far from reality. So I think it is still relevant. I think we are still at the beginning point of it, of design literacy that we hope to see. So if we are going to be solving such challenging problems as climate change, which is a planet level, and or interplanetary travel and inhabitation, those are all the kinds of things that will require design thinking and design approaches to be able to understand and solve problems, but also open up opportunities that we are otherwise not able to think about.
Great. What have we not asked you?
I think first, that's a question to ask ourselves, is what are we not asking ourselves? Because a good question is the most valuable thing, always. Mm-hmm. And questioning as a way of accessing the unknown, mm-hmm. I think is a very important thing. And we already see that, as you pointed out, technologies are here, but adaptation to, acculturation to, or acculturation of those technologies to solve a variety of problems is a particularly human limitation. Mm-hmm. And that in our societies, we are not able to agree upon certain realities. Right. Today is a human problem. That we are not able to connect with each other at a human level empathetically and compassionately is a human problem. That we still have the issues of racism and casteism and the inequities that have been structurally built in are human problems. So we have a lot of things to solve and approach, and perhaps design and design thinking might supplement. I wouldn't even hazard ambitiously placing design thinking as the central, mm-hmm. important mm-hmm. approach, but I would say one approach mm-hmm. to understanding and intervening and changing the world for the better for all living beings on the planet.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, Dr. Daas, I think you make a very interesting point. I was actually just going to chime in and ask if design thinking from a cross-cultural perspective, right? Is it a Western idea? Is it more of an Eastern idea? And I think you just summed it up very perfectly when you said that it's not this central sort of commonality between all different cultures.
Yeah, Anthony, I think that's a good point. Design thinking has been there forever. We might not have called it that a long time ago, but in every culture, every society, human beings have always very thoughtfully crafted their objects, spaces, and environments and experiences. When you think about rituals, rituals are experiences designed in a particular way, right? We designed objects, and when we walk into a museum of any kind or a living society that has lived for a very long period of time, like in India, you go to the city of Benares, which is 4,000 years old. And there you go and see that, yeah, people have been thoughtful and using design thinking for a long time, whether they realized it or not. So it gives me certainly hope that we now make it more intentional in being able to cultivate those competencies and approaches and skills. And once again, I would appeal to humility in us to lead us forward, and not the arrogance, which is in fact the downfall of many civilizations, has been throughout history. And if we can cultivate humility and compassion as essential qualities of inquiry and connecting with each other, then we can do many things well.
Yeah, on that note, on that very positive note about how humility can actually, make us live a lot longer than all the challenges of the world may say we may not. I think it's a good way to really, wrap up today's show. Not a show, but really a very, very, educative discussion with you, Dr. Das. Again, thank you so much for your time. I know we are at the end of our time contract, so I want to be respectful of that. Anthony Tillman, any last questions, comments that you have?
Yeah, once again, thank you again for making an appearance. I think, like I said, I can speak for everyone when I say that we learned a lot. But yeah, I think that was a great note to end the show on, is the idea of that, hey, look, no matter where you come from or what your cultural differences are, the human perspective is going to be what's going to save us. So.
Agreed. Thank you again so much for coming on. I think it's a very important thing that we keep in perspective, and that's humility. I think that's a very, very critical component to all this, because at the end of the day, we like to think of ourselves as this sort of, being that supersedes all the rest and everything like that. But we need to remember that we are subject to our surroundings to some extent, and working within that and being humble is going to be critical to our not only survival, but our prosperity.
Yeah.
Well said. Well, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed our conversations here, and hopefully the seeds of ideas are going to go a long way. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we hope that we can take all of this and really, create something that's meaningful. So thank you so much for your time again, Dr. Das.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Humans as robots, humans as biological robots. That's interesting. So are we as humans trying to create robots that will look like us, and future technologies make that happen? And an extension of that, sorry, Tillman, let's start again.
All good.
Design thinking, applying creativity that has been the topic of study in design disciplines to solve everyday problems. That's a good way to think about it. So that's what is design thinking, number one. Number two, humans are robots, biological robots per se, but robots nonetheless. And so whether biological robots or mechanical robots are the future, we don't know. But robotics is going to really lead to a lot of what our future looks like. That's number two. And number three, humility. We should not perceive that we know everything. We don't know everything. And the only way we will embrace what we don't know is by being humble. And if we can be humble, maybe we can see a path to the future. So thank you so much for this conversation, Dr. Das, about design thinking, about robotics, and about humility. Thank you.